Lastly, the point that Michael is mentioning, this move towards a blurring of lines. Business, civil society, organization, government. Who is responsible for what? Will we use the same terminology, or will we start to not just speak of the three, but perhaps a fourth, or what people are calling a hybrid fourth sector? So these are some broad sweeping terms. I am an American, so I'm going to quote my foreign minister or my Secretary of State, soon to not be. I don't know who's replacing her, that's a whole other issue. Civil society is the growth industry for the next generation. Those are her words, and I think that's an empowering thought for us all to sit with today. Hopefully nothing that I've just rattled off is surprising to you, but our hope, back to Nick's point about scenario development and all that you'll be thinking through today and the way we've been strategic about our agenda, is to get us to move a little bit forward, a step ahead. So we have no predetermined answers, and we look forward to hearing from each of you. Thank you.
So let's begin the first of our sessions, and can I just, for a quick second, give a special welcome to Carlson Tong, our former chairman for our China practice, who's here with us at the back. Thank you for coming, Carlson. And he's a living example of someone who's graduated from the hard grind of accountancy into the real world of political and social leadership here in Hong Kong. So it's great to have you with us. Thank you. We've got three people who are going to speak, and then two further panelists, and I'll ask them all to come up and join me if they can in their position. So first of all, Andrew McLeod, and Andrew is with Rio Tinto. Andrew has got an extensive background in working in international Red Cross related activities around the world, from Rwanda to Kosovo, and of course Yugoslavia. He's worked on intervention programs in different areas of the world, and has got the Australian Defence Medal and the Silver Medal for Humanity from the Montenegrin Red Cross. So welcome. Andrew is working at the moment in Mongolia. Ronald Wong, who is the Regional Head of Marketing for Asia Pacific, Royal Bank of Scotland, Markets and International Banking, member of the Markets Management Committee of the Bank, and Executive Committee member of the Heap Hong Society, which is a Hong Kong-based charity committed to providing professional care, education, training and family support to children who have learning and development disabilities. Dominic Scott, formerly part of the Canadian Diplomatic Corps, who's served around the world and is now working with Cisco Systems, public sector business for the Asia Pacific region, where he's responsible for community solutions. And then also Shalini Matali, who's founder and chief executive of Community Business. Thank you. And Chong Chang Yao, who's chairman of the board of Carbon Care Asia. So this is our panel for this next session of about an hour, and I'm going to invite our three speakers to either speak from here or speak from their sedentary position as they wish to set the scene on behalf of the organisations and businesses they represent, but more significantly based on the insights that they've drawn from a long life of engagement both in business and society. Starting off with Andrew.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you very much to KPMG for organising today and for inviting me to come along. As Michael indicated, I'm currently living in Mongolia, so to move around about 60 degrees Celsius positive is very good for me. I was walking to work the other day at minus 25, and I figured out you can handle minus 25 fairly well, but it then got to minus 30, which sort of hits you in the face. It's a very different temperature. And I was walking to work and my eyelashes froze. And it was only a 10-minute walk, and I was having a bit of a whinge to this, to my Mongolian staff, and they looked at me kind of perplexed and said, well, you do realise it's only autumn. And in fact, civil society and business puts us in many parts of the world and many challenges that we have to confront at different times. And I'd like to start off by being challenging. Are we talking about business and civil society, or are we talking about business is civil society? Michael Andrew has 140,000 people under his care. Rio Tinto, we have something similar. Is it more of a democratic choice to decide Pepsi or Coke on your purchasing decisions, or voting, or in many democratic countries not actually turning up to vote? It's an interesting challenge about where we're going to be going in the future, from where we are today looking forward to 2030. I'll also be challenging by putting another comment out to you. We almost have the perception as business leaders that we're the small players in the community development space. Like we're the newcomers coming in, got to learn from the big players, the NGOs and the UN agencies. Well, really? Let's look at capital flows. Capital flows from OECD countries to the developing world, 53% come through the private sector. 17% comes through foreign aid and 30% comes through remittances. So not only are we not the small player in the space, we are the biggest. Not only are we not new, we've been around for a long time, but the part of civil society that traditionally media and the literati look to bring the world out of poverty is actually the smallest component part of those major financial flows. No disrespect to Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, and I worked with Angelina a lot when I used to be at UNHCR, and she is very, very good at the work she does. But if we're really wanting to bring the world out of poverty, is it about doubling foreign aid, or is it about doubling effectiveness by creating partnerships between the private sector, remittances, which is a component part you'll almost never hear of right now, and foreign aid and civil society? And it's that partnership base which you've heard a few people speaking about today. Civil society and business relationship is changing. I like to say we have a three-way convergence point, and not just because of my accent, but it is manifesting itself in Australia more than any other part of the world at the moment. And this is the three-way convergence point. You have a growing awareness of some of the lack of effectiveness and lack of efficiency in some in the civil society, UN agencies and NGO world, and a desire to improve that. Secondly, you have a growing awareness amongst the private sector that the private sector has a role to play in community development, in economic development. It's why we're here. And the third convergence point is the demand from Generation Y. Generation Y want to have a social outcome as part of their work. And the reason I say it manifests in Australia more than anywhere else at the moment is because of the place Australia is, particularly compared to North America and Europe on the economic cycle. If you're in Spain and you're a Generation Y person, you'll take any job that you're going to get. But in Australia, with unemployment rates down around about 5, it's still the case that the best graduates coming out of universities are not hired and fired by their employer. The best graduates coming out of universities hire and fire their employer. I'm getting a job with my employer, and if my employer doesn't give me what I want, I'm going to sack that employer and go and get another one. Good graduates are doing that, and we're seeing the manifestation of that in many economies. It's a great challenge for high-quality staff retention and recruitment. In other words, there is a fundamental underlying business reason why a corporation should be involved in civil society, because their employees will demand it. And this is all changing, because we've got these two radically different cultures trying to come together. Business and profit-driven, and non-for-profit that's not profit-driven. How do you bring these two radically different cultures together? And the good thing is we've got a template. It's actually been done before. And what's the template? It's civil and military relations. If you look in post-conflict and conflict-related environments, in 1995 there were 10,000 non-military expatriate staff in Sarajevo alone, let alone the rest of Bosnia. On top of that, we had S4 and K4 all wandering around former Yugoslavia. You had soldiers from every single NATO country and every country that wanted to be a NATO country. And these two cultures did not know how to talk to each other. The civil society realised the military was going to be there, and military realised civil society was going to be there. How do you bring these two radical different cultures together? Well, a lot of work was done. And over more than a decade, you had in NGOs civil military liaison officers. And in most professional militaries, you have civil military liaison officers. And the ultimate came in the 2005 Pakistan earthquake response, when the UN official and the Pakistan military official in charge would sit in the same room together for 2.5 years. There was no cigarette paper between the strategic development of military and civil. So when we start looking forward and we start thinking, well, how do you bring these radically different cultures, business and non-business, together, we can look to a model that has been evolved before, which is about open and honest partnerships. It's about sharing weaknesses, not imposing strengths. So how does the next 17 years look? And I'm going to talk about two things. One is what I call beyond shared value, and the other is what I call development investment, not development aid. And beyond shared value is this. Most of us here will be very familiar with Michael Porter and Mark Kramer's thinking. Shared value about doing things not because it's CSR, but because it's good for business as well. But I want to challenge that, because at the moment our CSR or our shared value work is like a billboards. Here is KPMG's, here is Rio Tinto's, here is BHP's, here is ANZ's, just like a billboard. But I ask you to think about a Grand Prix car for a moment. Mark Webber, Australia's best Grand Prix driver. Who sponsors his car? Well, the answer is Red Bull and a dozen other companies. A lead and a whole bunch of other people in partnership. So why don't we look at our civil society interaction in that way? Look at it like a Grand Prix car, not a billboard. But don't look at it like a sector, because one of the other problems when you start looking at partnerships is the instinct to partner up with others in your sector. KPMG in some ways will partner up with PwC and Ernst & Young and others in some areas of lobbying. We partner up in the International Council of Mines and Minerals. Is that always the right way to go? Because I will put the proposition out that in the mining industry, there are some really good players like Rio Tinto, and give them credit, BHP Billiton. But boy, there's some dodgy brothers out there as well. And there's no way I want to be at the table with some of the coal miners operating in Mongolia right now. I don't want to be in any way hitched to those human rights abuses and those lack of occupational health and safety issues. I prefer to partner up with like-minded companies like KPMG, like Novartis, like Nestle. And guess what? If you partner up cross-sectorally with like-minded companies, you bring people of different skill sets to the table, not people of the same skill set to the table. So I think over the next 17 years we need to move beyond shared value. We need to move beyond just looking at our space, looking at the partnership that we can bring together and partner up with like-minded companies across different sectors. To then move into this second point, and I'll go back to Angelina Jolie again, we talk about doubling foreign aid. Why? Why don't we think in terms of foreign investment, development investment? If we're going to invest in an economy because we want to see people come out of poverty, we need to be able to measure if they are or are not coming out of poverty. And one of the challenges in the civil society and NGO movements is they say, oh, Andrew, you're just being too money-oriented when talking about efficiency and effectiveness. And I'm like, no, I'm not. This is about people. If I improve my efficiency rate in a $100 program to help poor children in Southeast Asia or Africa, if I get a 10% efficiency gain, I don't drop my money from $100 to $90. I increase the number of people I help from 10 to 11. And because we're talking about people, not money, efficiency is even more important than it is for profit-making organisations. So I put a challenge out to business leaders. When you go and work in civil society, don't leave your business brains at the door. It's the skill set you have, ruthless accounting, ruthless control of efficiency and effectiveness must come to civil society, must come to the NGOs because the people depend on it. So the skill set that you're bringing in your businesses is not necessarily just wanting to feel good and do nice stuff. It's your technical professional skill that you have. And that's why we should stop talking about corporate social responsibility. Beyond shared value is beyond CSR. You're not doing it on the side. Well, let's create a fund and a foundation, set it up, and they do the corporate social responsibility. You have actually more of an impact by changing the footprint of your business. I predict over the next 17 years we will see a lot of funds and foundations dry up and be closed down because the fundamental footprint of the way a corporate does its normal activity will fulfill that objective. Let me give you another statistic that I love. If you looked at just corporate social responsibility spending, in the case of Rio Tinto, 1% of pre-tax profit, the largest foreign development organisation coming out of Australia is the Australian government. Number 2 is World Vision. Number 3 is BHP Billiton. Number 4 is the Australian Red Cross. And number 5 is Rio Tinto as a foreign development organisation. If you include Indigenous salaries, we spend $134 million a year on CSR and we spend $990 million on Indigenous salaries. If you include Indigenous salaries, the 5 largest development agencies coming out of Australia are 1, the Australian Government, 2, BHP Billiton, 3, Rio Tinto, 4, World Vision, 5, the Australian Red Cross. It actually makes you think, doesn't it? And the people who are the most shocked often to see that we are the biggest players in the space are us, the business community themselves. One of the greatest challenges over the next 17 years is for us to reevaluate our own self-perception. And let me give you 2 classic examples. In Mongolia, we are developing the Oyu Tolgoi mine. We will be, when it's fully operating, 30% of Mongolia's GDP. Over the last 50 years, the UN civil society have been in Mongolia doing things and very little economic change has happened. Over the last 5, since we've started developing with partners, the mining industry, the economy has taken off with year-on-year GDP growth, some years exceeding 17 or 18%. A lot more has happened in terms of economic well-being in Mongolia in the last 5 years than in the previous 50. As part of the developing the Oyu Tolgoi mine, which is down near the Chinese border, about 600 km south of Ulaanbaatar, the capital, we need to build a town. Oyu Tolgoi needs somewhere for our staff to live. So we're setting the objective that we want to build Mongolia's most livable population centre. It's 3rd or 4th largest population centre. And our staff have said they would be prepared to move from Ulaanbaatar down to Oyu Tolgoi if we built a town that had good roads, good schools, good hospitals, and critically, a diversified economy which would allow for spousal employment. Why are we talking about this? Well, to fly in, fly out staff from Ulaanbaatar to Oyu Tolgoi in net present cost terms over the next 15 years is about $1.4 billion. In other words, the business case of creating a town with good schools, good hospitals, good roads and good community facilities is a potential saving in net present cost terms of $1.4 billion over 15 years, let alone life of mine, which could be between 50 and 100 years. It's a pure business decision to do the right thing. Now, we could do the old way of doing it, which is, well, let's build a mining town, put a fence around it, road, bridge, real building. The old engineering way of thinking about it. And we're like, for a start, that increases huge cultural risk, because if an Australian comes in and builds a town in Mongolia, we're going to screw it up. I don't know how we're going to screw it up, but we will. And we're taking enormous capital risk as well. We estimate the infrastructure for this town is about $720 million over the next 5 years to build it up. Why should we take all of that burden if what we wanted to do is build a new town? Surely we should be partnering up with people, with government, all 3 levels of government in Mongolia, other private sector providers on health, on infrastructure, on utilities and things like that, and then organisations like KPMG. A very good, small, concrete example. We were sitting down with Asian Development Bank a few weeks ago and saying what we really need to understand is what are the future revenue streams that can be attached to infrastructure in Hanbog, and then if we can understand those revenue streams, we can put that out to the other private sector investors who can take the capital risk. How are we going to do that study? KPMG's got some expertise in that. So now, after our discussion, ADB and KPMG are coming together to do an initial study of future revenue streams so we can go back to the private sector and see who else can invest in capital. All of this is a very private sector discussion. Future revenue streams, profitability, capital risk, cultural risk. But if we do this well, we will create a town which is Mongolia's most livable. And one last little example, because it's very easy to talk in the developing world, so let's talk about developed world. Michael Andrew knows very well an organisation called Committee for Melbourne. Committee for Melbourne was created 25 years ago. Michael used to be on the board. KPMG is a member. Rio Tinto is a member. And what the Committee for Melbourne is it brings all the private sector in Melbourne together to talk about long-term livability issues, social cohesion, infrastructure financing and planning. All these sorts of things that a CEO couldn't risk his or her brand image or his or her company's brand image by engaging in the political debate. But by coming collaboratively together, they can. This is not a chamber of commerce. This is not a business council. It is an organisation that brings multi-sectoral players together to talk about long-term livability issues, because if the town is good, the city is good, the people are happy, and business is good. There is a sound commercial reason for doing this. So in summary, we are facing enormous changes between business and civil society. In fact, I would say business seeing itself as civil society is critical among those changes. Secondly, we've already got an example. We've seen how civil and military have done it. Let's try and learn from them. And thirdly, if we change our mindset from development aid to development investment, and we look to partner up between civil society, business and people providing remittances, and bring multi-sectoral people around the table, the problems will be able to be solved. They will never be easy, but they will be able to be solved. And in solving those problems, not only will we, in the case of Hanbog in Oyu Tolgoi in Mongolia, build a town, help build an economy, help build a country, but also build profitability and business, because we must move beyond looking at it as corporate social responsibility. What we need to do is engage because it's in our pure business interest to do so. Thank you very much.
So moving on now to Ronald Wong from RBS.
I've promised Kate not to go over 12 minutes, so I've got my time with me. It's interesting to see, isn't it, the state of banking these days, where Rio Tinto has a little iPad-y type thing and bankers have papers.
I have to say, I paid for it, Rio Tinto didn't.
Sorry, is the clicker? Okay, first of all, thank you to Diana for inviting me here today. When I looked through the list of attendees, I was a bit overawed with the amount of firepower in here. So, and already this morning with the opening speeches and with Andrews, I mean, there's just so many themes that I could weave into mine as well, and so many things that are coming through. And I look forward to this meeting as many of you as possible over lunch and the coffee breaks. So my topic today really, and I've only got a few pictures, so don't be too scared about a PowerPoint, is around my role in banking as part of a large bank that, for those who are familiar, is going through enormous change. But I think I can speak for the banking sector as a whole with a lot of things, because there are very few banks today that haven't come through the crisis unscathed, reputationally or financially. In my role as in the NGO sector, I think if there are questions during the panel discussions, I'll happy to take it, but primarily it's in the role of RBS. So, as I said, this is a picture of those familiar with Hong Kong, with the protests around the Hong Kong warrants and the mini bonds saga. I think that it's endemic across the whole issue about trust between the man or woman on the street and banking. I think we all know about, and the whole around pay, etc. You know, they are big issues. So, and I noticed today that the banking sector is very underrepresented here. But for better or for worse, it wields the most power and influence in the world in terms of trade flows, in terms of political flows, etc. So what I want to cover today very quickly is two things, and apologies for those who know the banking sector well and have followed the financial crisis, but I think it gives good context. And the two things that I will cover are what happened and how did we get into this mess. But more importantly, going back to the topic of today, is what are we doing about it? Now, when I hear the Rio Tinto case, I think RBS and the banking sector are far behind that in terms of engaging with civil society and building things. But some of the themes that have come through, like if you build and work with your communities, actually there is a good business reason for that. Those are the types of ideas and themes that the banking industry is now coming towards. And I'll explain a little bit about that in a minute in terms of the change in our culture at RBS as well. So the key message I'd like to leave with you is that the financial sector and banks in particular need to rebuild trust with the stakeholders in order to have what we call a license to operate. And we've talked about this quite a lot within RBS for the last 6 months, last year. There has to be a cultural shift, and we are seeing that within our organization. Reconnecting with customers, reconnecting with communities we work in, management excellence, things like board governance and risk management. And lastly and not least, reforming the pay structures. So the way bankers get paid, the amount of risk they take to get what they get paid for, some of the things that came out this morning, that's all changing as well. And the old Milton Friedman, to paraphrase him, the fact that the social responsibility of companies to make profits, you know, that can't in itself exist. But then we can't lose sight of the fact that banks and corporations are there to make profit. And it's really this struggle, how you make the profits really is what we are discussing today. So why should banks be special? Well, I guess we are an integral part of the community. You know, all of us have loans, deposits, credit cards, you know, mortgages. We lend to businesses, and you know, we facilitate trade flows out in the world, whether it's trade finance or whether it's raising capital. And as Franklin D. Roosevelt said when he was trying to explain to the US public in the 1930s why banks matter. When you deposit money, he said, the bank that puts your money to work keeps the wheels of industry and agriculture turning. So if you look at RBS, I think one anecdote that I had when RBS was at its biggest is that a UK citizen walking out the door in the morning would get touched by RBS in nearly everything that they do, whether it was filling petrol, getting a license for their cars, financing for their cars, going to the supermarket at Tesco's to get money out, all through the chain, going to the pub. I mean, RBS and the other big UK banks, had a place in all their lives. So then what happened since 2008? Well, what caused 2008 to happen for RBS? I think there was a blind focus on profits, and there was a misaligned remuneration sectors. And all of this led to dysfunctional behaviors by not all bankers, but by some of the bankers. But it was a culture that was built around getting big, globalization, taking over other banks, and this almost need for being larger and having a global footprint. Excessive risk-taking, as well as things that are coming through today, like the protected PPI in the UK, where people was missold insurance, as well as the current thing with investment banks, which is around the LIBOR setting. So all those dysfunctional behaviors has caused hubris and arrogance, and it's brought down a lot of people in the banking sector. And a little bit about RBS there, just very quickly. This is a picture of protests that happened a few years ago in, I think it was one of the bank branches in Bishopsgate. We were highly leveraged, and there was very poor board governance insofar as checks and balances in place for some of the investment decisions that were made. On the eve of the collapse, RBS had a balance sheet of $1.6 trillion. That was the size of the UK economy in one bank. We were relied upon by 30 million customers, and because of that, the government could not let the bank fail. And we required $45 billion worth of government aid to keep us afloat. And in that time, since our new chief executive, Stephen Hester, came in, he had has a five-year plan. We're in the fourth year of that now, and it is probably the largest and most far-reaching company restructuring ever. So where are we today? Well, we've reduced our balance sheet by 700 million pounds, which is the size of the fifth largest bank in the US. The change is reducing the investment banking and risk-taking type of activities and getting back to core retail banks and commercial businesses. And in a lot of cases, we're ahead of the measures. But the biggest change that I can see really is this cultural, a shift in cultural thinking about actually why do we exist, and in terms of how do we reconnect with our customers specifically. So I wanted to quickly highlight some of the things that RBS is doing. And this is not an infomercial, so I'll really whiz through this because I want to get to the point about employee engagement and how we're engaging with the community. But this is taken from our sustainability report, which is on the internet. The big things that have happened in terms of the change in culture is the setup of the group sustainability committee within the bank. And this is chaired by our most senior non-independent director in 2009. And this is how it may be old hat to a lot of the organizations, but for RBS to have the sustainability committee to be part of the main agenda is something that is taken a while to get there. And there's 5 key themes to our sustainability agenda: fair banking, supporting enterprise, safety and security, and the 2 I'd like to touch upon is around employee engagement and citizenship and environment. So in terms of what the pictures reflect, there's something there around RBS, the foundation in India helping specifically around microfinancing. Down by Lockout is around building enterprise with the Princess Trust and the work we do and support around that. The Rugby Force is really how we engage the sponsorship of the 6 nations, but taking it not just in terms of client hospitality, but taking it to the grassroots within the communities in the UK where we operate. And then Money Sense, obviously being a bank, how do we actually provide those skills to high school students, to people who have trouble through death, whether it's through divorce or people with mental illnesses who still need to manage their money. So a lot of the work at the community level which works to our skill sets. So on the two that I'd like to talk, just touch upon around employee engagement is that we do an employee opinion survey every year, and relatively we've done very well compared to our peers. In 12 of the 13 categories we do quite well. It's a relative game, so that if everyone's feeling down, it's how down you feel more than anything else. But at least given the problems we've faced, I think we've come out of that quite